But anyway, with all the, did you ever see, to the point of the culture wars as a distraction? You ever see like you know those like Nexus charts where you can chart like words that are used in mainstream like big newspapers and stuff. So you could chart like a word in the New York Times and how many times it's used.
Right.
And if you or Washington Post or whatever, if you take any of these like woke, you take the term racism and you put it in a Nexus chart, and they'll show you throughout the years how many times the term racism is used in the New York Times. And it's like this, and then around like 2011, 2012, goes way up. And social justice, way up. Toxic masculinity, way up. Like, and this isn't coming from like the young kids. This isn't coming from 20-year-olds. This isn't coming from the college universities. These are the biggest corporate, media platforms in the country. All at this time, like, flooded the market with this woke shit. Now, I'm not saying it didn't exist in college universities. I'm not saying that wasn't already going on. I'm just saying that what changed around that time, and it was right toward Obama's second term, what changed was that all of a sudden the woke shit went from being shit that was taught, like critical race theory, and this stuff was taught in college universities, but all of a sudden it had the backing of all of the biggest, most powerful corporations in the world and all of the political class, and all of it just got pumped in. And the theory kind of is that what had happened right then in 2010 was you had these huge, this big left-wing populist movement and this big right-wing populist movement. You had the Occupy movement and the Tea Party movement. And they were kind of started over the same thing, which were the banker bailouts. Like the first Tea Party like things were started over the Ron Paul campaigns and the TARP. That was like when the first Tea Parties broke out. And then the Occupy thing was in direct response to the banker bailouts and all of this stuff. And you had these big movements. And the lefties back then were standing outside of the big banks screaming, "We are the 99%. And when they were saying 99%, they didn't even mean 99%. They meant 99.9%. They were like, we're the people who don't own banks.
Right.
Like the people who own banks versus the people who don't own banks. That's who we represent. That was like the leftist populist movement. And then all of these huge publications, I'm not talking about mom and pop newspapers. I'm saying the New York Times and the Washington Post. You know what I mean? All they wanted to talk about all day was what divides all of them. It was like, no, you're not the 99%. You're the whites versus the blacks, the gays versus the straights, the trans versus the cis. And it does, and now you look at it and you see like the gay pride parade floats and there's like a Bank of America float. And it just seems to me like these big banks essentially bought off the left with all this woke shit, completely distracted them from where their eyes were on the prize, and then turned the left and right against each other, where now they're all fighting. So, like, to your point, it's not that what they're fighting about doesn't necessarily mean anything. Some of them are very important issues, but none of them affect the bottom line for the most powerful people in our society. And what are the bankers doing now since those banker bailouts? They got a whole new round of bailouts in 2020. They're raking in profits still. Nothing was ever addressed about that whole corrupt system.
So do you think that there was a concerted effort to do this? Like, was there a conversation? Like, how do you think something like that happens? If you think that there's this ramp up, and it's been proven by these studies that if you look at the words, like, is it a function of people graduating from these universities and taking these jobs in these companies and deciding to push this agenda because they think that social justice is important, because they do see, these opponents of Obama as being these racist people that are like this like underbelly of society that we weren't totally aware of? It needs to be addressed. Or do you think that there is really like a concerted effort from corporations to get people to divide? And if that's the case, how was it discussed?
Well, I can't. So look, the thing is, essentially, the answer is I don't know. Because I don't have factually, I don't know for sure. But there's I think it was either, I can't remember if it was Michael Tracy or if it was Matt Taibbi. One of them said it, but he goes, "I'm not saying wokeism is a CIA operation, but if it was, everything makes perfect sense." So I'm I don't know. And again, those Nexus charts, they're not even like studies. They're just mapping the word and how many times it's used. But there is no question that amongst the most powerful like forces in media, there was a concerted effort to do this. And my guess is that it's much less likely that that came from the 20-year-old interns than that came from some power source up at the top. And I think there was an effort to do this. I think it came from the very top. And and this has been going on, by the way, for a long time. Like back in the day, there was this is what they did to the right wing in this country. This is what National Review did when they turned the right wing into culture warriors, when they never were before. Like the old right, the old, like Robert Taft, who was known as Mr. Republican. His whole thing was like non-interventionist foreign policy, sound money, like some protectionism. So you protect like American jobs and stuff like that. It was all like this old school right wing thing. And then National Review and all this like new right rose up in like the 60s. And they were like, no, listen, what really matters is like there's homos out there. All right, like that's really what us right-wingers care about. What we really care about is abortion. What we really care about is, again, not saying abortion is not an important issue. I'm just saying, but they used that, and then they were like, oh, and by the way, that non-interventionist foreign policy thing, yeah, we're not doing that anymore. We're cold warriors now, and we're going to fight communism all throughout the world. Get on board. And so it seems like this is a tried and true tactic to like break up these movements that can actually threaten where like the real gravy train is. Right. And where is that? That's like in the military industrial complex, in the banking complex, the pharmaceutical industrial complex. That's where the real American fascism lies. Not in some people who, trespassed on government property in January 6th, who had nothing, was completely powerless, and then is now sitting in solitary confinement for how many hundreds of days. That's not like the face of fascism in America. If you want to talk about fascism in America, look at like the Patriot Act. Look at vaccine passports. Look at like, Lockheed Martin and Raytheon. That's where the fascism lies.